So there we are again with those unfortunately lost originals. Just as the Christian apologists tell us and try to convince us that the Bible is the Word of God because they have so many copies. All those copies are different, but they have so many copies, and they have more copies of the New Testament than they do of other works that were not religious works, secular works, and they only have a couple of copies of those, but oh, we've got thousands of copies. Who was doing the copying? The Catholic Church was doing the copying. Their monks were doing the copying. And because they chose to make more copies of the New Testament and less copies of secular works, that somehow that proves that the Bible is the Word of God? No, not on your life is that proof. As it turns out, as these people have been telling us, they were all forgeries. Every single one of them. Let me read further on Anatoly Fomenko's blog here. The consensual chronology is thousands of years too long, and this renders population growth and climate change forecast models unreliable. Our theory simply returns the chronological of world history to the realm of applied mathematics from which it was sequestered by the clergy in the 16th and 17th centuries. We have developed a number of valid and verifiable methods of historical research based on statistics, astronomy, and logic. For example, computer-assisted recalculation of eclipses with detailed descriptions allegedly belonging to antiquity show that they either occurred in the Middle Ages or they didn't occur at all. A simple application of computational astronomy to the rules of the calculation of Easter, according to the Easter Book, introduced by the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, shows that it definitely could not have taken place before 784. Finally, he says some related questions may arise. When and where was Jesus Christ born? When was he crucified? Chronological analysis of the Old Testament definitely shows that it was compiled after the new one, and that it renders medieval events in biblical disguise. In other words, medieval events were moved back in history, given different names to the characters, different places in which these characters supposedly lived, and it's simply related events that were happening in the Middle Ages. And then they go back again, and they go back and do it again. And this is why we can read about Sargon and Moses and Joseph and Jesus Christ and even Mohammed, and how there are so many similarities between each one of them. They all claim to have done this and that, and we were told, oh no, those were prophecies of something that was going to happen in the future. No, these were things that happened in the Middle Ages, and then they were reflected back into a phony history prior to that. and a phony history prior to that. This is how the Old Testament could be shown to have prophesied all these future events. The events happened before the text was written. And the church knew this and falsified all of history to cover it up and to give themselves a place of power within the world. I wanted to go back again and read a little bit more about Wilhelm Kemmerer, as Anatoly Fomenko is describing him. He says, naturally, Kemmerer wasn't the first to discover forgeries during the research of ancient or presumably ancient documents. His primary merit is that he managed to recognize the more or less systematic, large-scale activities of whole generations of hoaxers serving the Catholic Church, or individual feudal rulers, and grasp the real scale of the historical falsification campaign, which had been great enough to surprise historians even before his time. These hoaxers have destroyed a great many of old originals and replaced them with forgeries. Old texts would often simply be erased, with a new one taking the place on an ancient parchment, which would make the forgery look like an authentic ancient relic. It would often take a very minor alteration to change the original meaning of the document completely. According to Kemmerer, the key goal of this prolonged and massive campaign for the falsification of historical documents had been the concealment, the distortion, and the arbitrary extension of pre-Christian history, with all the achievements of the pagan epoch ascribed thereto. Apart from that, legal acknowledgement of the possession rights must have been in high demand among new feudal rulers, and whose property was acquired from lawful pagan owners rather than recently and in a violent manner. Falsified donation documents were necessary to declare ancient rights of possession. Their authorship could be traced to one of the great Christian rulers of antiquity. Many of these ancient Christian rulers were entirely fictitious, just as I believe Jesus is fictitious.